Let me start instead with probably one of the flattest speeches I've heard for a while. Now, last night I told you I expected Prime Minister Scott Morrison to nail this speech today to the National Press Club. He'd make the big call, get back to work fast. Every job counts, every minute counts. Instead, big disappointment. Where is the vision of this government? The big ideas, the fight? Now, it's true. Morrison did have a good line today. Good marketing spin.
At some point, you've got to get your economy out of ICU. You've got to get it off the medication before it becomes too accustomed to it.
That actually happens to be absolutely true. Let us get cracking. But where was Morrison's plan for that? What he talked about instead were things that won't put a single extra Australian back to work before Christmas. Morrison today floated two proposals only. First, some reform of how we train young Australians. He's worried that subsidies for particular courses are different from state to state. Of all the things in this crisis, this is what the Prime Minister is focused on fixing.
There is also substantial variations in fees for students depending on which state they are in. For example, in 2019, a student undertaking Certificate 3 in blinds, awning and security screens received a subsidy of $3,726 in Queensland, $9,630 in New South Wales, and no subsidy in Victoria unless the qualification is taken as an apprenticeship.
Who the hell cares? Morrison is sweating the small stuff. We have hundreds of thousands of people have just been thrown out of work by the government virus bans. We have millions more Australians whose jobs, they're hanging on to them by the skin of their teeth because they're propped up only by the government's new JobKeeper subsidies, which will run out in a few months. And we're talking here about training subsidies for security screen installers in Queensland, how they're different to ones in New South Wales, how nurses aren't subsidised alike in every state. All right, that wasn't quite the biggest priority in Morrison's speech today. What really seemed to excite him more was being another Bob Hawke. You know, this idea of bringing Australians together, consensus. Consensus, which actually means big business and big unions making a deal, by September in this case, on industrial relations that suits them, not necessarily you.
Now, the first step is to get everyone back in the room, to bring people together. That's our job. And in particular, that's my job. No one side has all the answers, employees or employers.
Look, it's intoxicating, this idea of being loved by all, of being the great peacemaker in the room, the chairman bringing the parties together, kumbaya. Now, Bob Hawke had that with his famous economic summit. And so did Kevin Rudd with his ludicrous summit of 1,000 of our so-called best and brightest to redesign a new Australia by 2020. But the difference between Hawke and Morrison, let alone Rudd, big difference there is that Hawke at least had a firm idea of the big things he wanted his consensus to achieve. In his case, he wanted an accord. Basically, unions to stop striking so much in exchange for more government support for workers. But what exactly does Morrison want? Apart from more jobs, which, I mean, we all want that. Today, even scrapped legislation the Liberals have spent years fighting for, workplace laws, to tame the lawless CFMEU construction union, just dumped to placate the union bosses that Morrison now wants to be friends with.
In good faith, we have decided that the government will not pursue a further vote in the Senate on its Ensuring Integrity Bill.
Well, in exchange, we're going to get a talk fest on changes to the industrial relations system. Now, changes are necessary, so I guess talk is good, but these probably won't be big changes or else there won't be this consensus he wants. In fact, the militant boss of the ACTU today made absolutely clear that any changes they'd agree to would be to re-regulate the economy, more intervention, when the Liberals have sweated blood for decades to get less.
There's two benchmarks that we will have. And the first is, will any proposal make jobs more secure for working people. The second measure is making sure that working people get their fair share of the nation's wealth, their fair share of productivity.
Now, I get it. Morrison likes to be liked. Who doesn't? And this year went through absolute hell during the bushfires when he was hated. I mean, people refused even to shake his hand. He got heckled in his little trips to the fire zones. And with the coronavirus, of course, all that has changed. I mean, to fight the virus, Morrison joined the premiers in a national cabinet, all unity, all consensus, no public fights. And for the sake of peace, Morrison even went along with a massive shutdown of the economy. It turned out to be a massive overreaction, although he's angry to be reminded of that.
We should not downplay this achievement, and pretend like the risk never existed or that our preparations or our precautions were unwarranted. Let me assure you, Australia, the risk was great and uncertain, and it still is. Countries like ours, developed, sophisticated economies with strong health systems, have experienced death rates more than 100 times what we have experienced here in Australia.
Well, actually, other countries quite close to us, Taiwan, for instance, that had a much lower death rate, much lower, 7 people. Or New Zealand, Singapore, they've got about the same. Yet Taiwan and Singapore, they kept their economies much more open. That's the issue. Not that there wasn't any danger, that there was an overreaction. Still, what does that matter that the Morrison government overreacted, along with the states in particular, driven by the states, of course? Morrison is now super popular, even if our economy is now a wreck. And I think that Morrison now wants more of this unity, no fights.
Everybody's got to put their weapons down on this.
And the problem is, what you won't fight for, you'll never win. Now, I don't want to be too harsh, because Morrison has stood up, for instance, very well to China. And he does say he wants to fight for jobs. But how? What exactly will the Liberals under Morrison now fight for?